Getting you caught up on all things that you need to know about the Raiders' current coaching staff as some early dominoes begin to drop. That plus a whole lot more comes up on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for January 12th, 2024.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. To get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available, as always, you're checking us out on YouTube. Thank you. Definitely appreciate that. The show is growing in a major way, and it's growing because of my man, Ari. Ari does a great job each and every day making sure we're on YouTube, we're looking good, we're sounding good. Takes a lot of pride in his work, and we definitely appreciate that. Check him out on Twitter at Ari Producers. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And you know we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. We'll get as much as your calls and texts in as possible. Coming up in segment number 3 as we close out the show. Segment number 2, we want to take you, do a little bit of a deep dive when it comes to Antonio Pierce. Feel like it's really been the Antonio Pierce week. As we're anticipating who the next head coach of the Silver and Black will it be. Is it Antonio Pierce? Will he get that full-time head coaching job? Will it be Jim Harbaugh? Will it be other? We've had a lot of conversation about Antonio Pierce this week, so we'll close things out this week with a conversation I had with Michael Lee from the Washington Post where he did a deep dive on Antonio Pierce, so that'll come up in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, just give you the news and the notes of the day, kind of get you caught up on all things you need to know when it comes to the Raiders and their coaching staff. We'll do that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Off top, I mentioned the other day that the New York Giants had reached out to the Raiders for permission to interview Carmen Bricillo, who's the Raiders offensive line coach, for the same job on Brian Daboll's coaching staff. And the Raiders granted Carmen Bricillo the right to go ahead and interview with the Giants. And the Raiders allowed all the coaches, they gave all the coaches on the staff permission to seek employment otherwhere or go interview other places. But they also said, make sure you keep us in the loop of what's going on. So we talked about it on Thursday's show, and, well, later on Thursday afternoon, it was announced that the Giants are actually hiring former Raiders offensive line coach Carmen Bricillo for the same position. And my man Vinny Bonsignore tweeted out, Bricillo leaving the Raiders for the Giants for the same offensive line coach position is a pretty good sign that big changes are coming to the Raiders offensive staff. And I couldn't agree with that more. Right, I think that the Raiders are going to try to keep their defense intact, led by Patrick Graham, who interviewed with the Chargers, by the way, on Thursday, completed his interview for the head coaching position. But the Raiders did block Patrick Graham when he was trying to interview, or when a team was trying to interview him for the defensive coordinator position. They blocked that. So they didn't want to let him get away for a lateral movement, but they can't stop him from interviewing for the head coaching position. And you see, just like that, Carmen Bricillo already snatched up. So the offensive line coach that I think did a really good job with not a lot to work with. Like, we talked about the offensive line many times, and I know it wasn't perfect, but he still did pretty good for what it's worth. I mean, last year, the Raiders, Josh Jacobs led the league in rushing, so that was good. And then this year, I thought that they did pretty good, and I thought that some guys developed, like Thayer Munford. You saw Dylan Parham play multiple positions, and I thought Jermaine Illuminor even got better at the right tackle position. So Carmen Bricillo is no longer a Raiders offensive line coach. He is now the Giants offensive line coach. Also, I mentioned on Thursday's show that the Raiders interviewed Kelly Klein Van Callaghan for their open GM spot, and she comes from the Denver Broncos. She's the Broncos executive director of football operations, special advisor to the general manager, joined the organization with George Payton back in 2021. So what does all that mean, right? What does all that mean? So I thought I'd reach out. I reached out to my guy, Zach Stevens from DNVR Sports. He covers the Broncos like a glove. He's usually on my radio show talking all things just Broncos and Raiders as far as a game comes up, kind of like a little crossover edition. But instead, I had him on my radio show on Thursday afternoon to talk about Kelly Klein Van Callaghan and what exactly does her job entail with the Denver Broncos.
She has a big job with the Broncos. You hear the executive director of football operations and special advisor to the general manager. Essentially, what all of that boils down to is she's essentially just underneath the assistant general manager. So she is not the assistant general manager for the Broncos. The Broncos have an assistant general manager. So they have George Payton as the general manager. They have Darren Mugie, the assistant general manager. And then Kelly Klein is right under that spot. And Kelly Klein, she has her toes in everything from the personnel department, player evaluation. She's with the Broncos draft, free agency evaluations, day-to-day football operations, and then she also leads their video department. So in terms of setting herself up to be a general manager someday, she has all of the experience needed in terms of everything that a general manager does. Now, I think because I mentioned that she is not the assistant general manager, I would expect, and she's also very young, I believe early 30s. I believe her next step is probably to be an assistant general manager, and so it makes a ton of sense for her to get interviews to be a general manager now, and then once the Raiders or another team hire a general manager, she could be in a prime position for that raise to be an assistant general manager, and she's on pace right now, Q, to be the first female general manager in NFL history, whether that happens this cycle or a couple of years from now. She is on track for that.
So there you go. So after the conversation I had with Zach Stevens talking all things Kelly Klein Van Callaghan, I really got the Champ Kelly feel from that interview. And what do I mean by that? Well, the Raiders hired Champ Kelly to be the assistant GM. They hired Dave Ziegler to be the GM. Well, obviously, Dave Ziegler got fired when Josh McDaniels did, so Champ Kelly takes over as the interim GM. But I feel like they could possibly have interviewed Kelly Klein Van Callaghan from the Broncos for that same assistant GM job. Does that mean that Champ Kelly is going to get the GM job? No, not at all. But I think it's important to the Raiders to have that assistant GM, right? Some teams don't have an assistant GM. Some teams just have a GM, and then they have, other executives in that front office that assist the GM, but it's not necessarily have the assistant GM title. And you heard what Zach said. She is not the assistant GM, but he felt like that was her next role. So I found that pretty intriguing when he said that, and she's young. She's got a sharp mind, obviously. All Zach could do is really rant and rave about her, and that was just one little soundbite, just a minute and a half of what he had to say about her. But he had a lot of really good things to say about her. So I'm envisioning a role for her where she could potentially be the assistant GM for the Raiders. And again, Champ Kelly, when he interviewed for the GM, similar to what Kelly Klein Van Callaghan did, he interviewed for the GM job, eventually got the assistant GM job. I could definitely see a world where she does the same thing. I'm not saying she's going to get that job, but it's just based off of what Zach had to say about her, I could see her filling that void. Also, today, and this comes from Jeremy Fowler, Colts assistant GM Ed Dodds is expected to interview for the Raiders general manager job today, one of the top candidates in recent years in the mix in Vegas. And Ed Dodds has been in the mix with the Raiders before. When Mark Davis decided to go with Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, Ed Dodds was in the mix then. And everyone thought, okay, if Ed Dodds gets a job, Jim Harbaugh's coming. Those two are kind of, like I said, they've been joined at the hip for a while. It's been speculated that if Dodds gets a job, Harbaugh's going to come. If Harbaugh is going to arrive, then Ed Dodds is going to get the job. That's been talked about going back to before the Raiders hired Josh McDaniels. So I just throw that out there to let it be known that Ed Dodds is going to be in town today. Depending on what time you're listening to this, he might have already interviewed with the Silver and Black. But the interview was accepted, and it's going to take place sometime today. So just another person coming in, just like Kelly Klein Van Callaghan did, to interview for the GM job. And from everything that I understand, as I was talking to Vinny Bonsignore and others, Vic Tafer and others, they all believe that the Raiders are going to do the hiring in the order that I believe that they should, which is hire the GM first, then the GM will hire the head coach. That's how it should be. That's not how it was when they hired McDaniels. It sure is not how it was when they hired John Gruden. Hell, when they hired John Gruden 2.0, Reggie McKenzie was still in the mix, right? And then Reggie McKenzie got ran up out of town, and then John Gruden hired Mike Mayock. And so Gruden was basically the GM's boss, right? He was his boss's boss, which doesn't make any sense. And that's not how I think this thing should go these days. I think that the GM should hire the head coach. And so we'll see what happens. We'll see exactly what order the Raiders go in. But it seems like from everyone I've talked to that they're definitely going to hire a GM first, and then that person will go ahead and hire the head coach. My final little nugget I have for you for segment number 1 here on today's Locked On Raiders podcast on this Friday has sound that goes with it. And we all found out about Bill Belichick and the Patriots mutually parting ways after 24 years. That came down on Thursday. Well, Ian Rappaport from NFL Network, NFL.com, tweeted out sources. Gerard Mayo is a strong candidate to replace Bill Belichick, and if he is the choice, the Patriots could simply hire him. No need to go through the lengthy hiring process. They established a firm contractual succession plan in prior contract and communicated to the NFL. So I had a lot of people tweet at me, send me direct messages. Wait, what the hell? Why is it okay for the Patriots to not go through the hiring process, not have to satisfy the Rooney Rule? Why is it okay for them and not the Raiders? Well, let Ian Rappaport explain it just a little bit further. Here he is.
Here's where it stands with Gerard Mayo. My understanding is he is considered to be a strong candidate to replace Bill Belichick as the next Patriots coach. And if that is the choice, which has not been fully decided as of now, but if that is the choice, from what I'm told by a variety of sources, the Patriots would not have to go through a lengthy process, would not have to fulfill the Rooney Rule, would not have to do the other DEI obligations of every other team. The reason why is because they established Gerard Mayo as the successor to Bill Belichick. They did this contractually with his current contract. They made it clear before the season, and they communicated this to the league. In that case, similar to what the Baltimore Ravens did with general manager Eric DeCosta, similar to what the Colts did with Jim Caldwell, and similar to what the Seahawks did with Jim Mora, in that circumstance, the Patriots could simply hire Gerard Mayo and make him the next coach. Certainly this could be sooner rather than later, Andrew.
So basically, what he's saying in a nutshell is the Patriots already established that Gerard Mayo was going to be in consideration to be the successor to Bill Belichick, or could easily be the successor to Bill Belichick, but they put that in his contract. And the reason why the Raiders couldn't do that, they didn't put that in Antonio Pierce's contract. The Raiders didn't have any plan of firing Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. They thought that when they hired Antonio Pierce, he was a linebackers coach. He was not going to be the guy that was going to be the head coach. The Raiders had a 3-year plan, at least with Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, that unless it fell off the rails, they were going to see that through. Well, it fell off the rails. So that's why they got fired on Halloween, and then that's when Antonio Pierce was elevated to the interim head coach position. So that's why, against many different reports that happened throughout the season, the Raiders could just hire him if they want to. They can just rip off that interim tag whenever they want. No, they couldn't. It was not in the contract, so they had to go through the lengthy hiring process. And there's some folks out there that are reporting that, yeah, they could do that. They could just hire him immediately, rip off that tag. Now we're trying to kind of backpedal and say, well, if the Raiders had changed the contract, then they could have done it. No, that's not what was reported. It was a bunch of, wrong information, bad information being put out there. The true information is the Patriots can do it because they already put in the contract prior to the season and let that be known to the NFL. So that's why it could be done if they do choose to do that, and the Raiders couldn't. So that's all I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up in segment number 2, you'll hear from my guy Michael Lee from the Washington Post talking all things Antonio Pierce. He put out a really good piece. I'll explain it, and then you'll hear that conversation. We'll do it coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. We'll do that right after I tell you about today's title sponsor of the show, which is Gametime. And you shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event, right? Gametime is fast and easy. It's the best way to buy tickets for sporting events, concerts, comedy shows, theater events, whatever's going on near you. Gametime has got you covered. They've got last-minute deals. So if you have family that comes to town last minute and you want to go to an event, or maybe some friends, they have all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And that's the best part, right? You hate guessing. You hate just buying tickets assuming they're going to be really good seats. Then you get there and you're like, oh, man, it looked good. The little square looked good when I bought it. It don't look good now. Well, Gametime does good things for you. They have the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. They have all-in prices, show your total up front. You know what you're getting, and you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. What do you have to do to do that? Well, download the Gametime app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to finish off the week really strong. It's been a pretty much Antonio Pierce type week. And look, that doesn't mean that he's the only guy that can get the job and be successful for the Raiders. I've said it many times. I don't want anyone to get it twisted. There's multiple guys that could take this job and run with it and make the team a really good team. I think that the Raiders are trending in the right direction. We got a glimpse of what they could look like, but it doesn't mean that Antonio Pierce is the only guy that can get it done, right? And we know the names that are out there, floating out there, and even names that we don't know out there. Someone could be hired that we're all surprised by and really take this team to the next level. But it's been an Antonio Pierce type theme just because of what he was able to do as the interim head coach. I think he did a good job at 5-4. Some don't. That's fine. That's okay. You're entitled to your own opinion. But my guy Michael Lee from the Washington Post put out a really good piece that I read over the weekend, and I reached out to him. I was like, man, I got to get you on the radio show to talk about it. So I talked to him about it, I believe, on Monday, and the piece is called Antonio Pierce Won Over the Raiders. Is that enough to win the job? So with that being said, here's that conversation I had with Michael Lee from the Washington Post talking all things Antonio Pierce. Check it out. In your deep diving, in your research, and the way you wrote this up, I mean, how much did you learn about the man who is Antonio Pierce over the time before you put this together?
Well, I think the one thing that stood out to me is that he's somebody who has sort of really had to earn his keep and has been and when you have to earn your keep all the time, there's a level of, I don't say insecurity, but there's a certain you're not complacent, and when you have that in you, you have that chip that you always want to work hard, you're always going to earn it. That stays with you, no matter what level you are. If you make it to All-Pro, you win a Super Bowl, that chip is still going to stay with you, and I think that's what's happened with Antonio Pierce. It's like he's never rested on his laurels. He's never felt like he was comfortable enough to just get by. So he's going to work hard, and he's going to keep pushing himself and give everything he has to everything he's in. And when you have that kind of commitment and you kind of exude that when you come to work every day, your players respond to that, and they give you all they got because they know that, you committed just as much as they are. So I just think somebody who was undrafted, who was unheralded out of high school, didn't have any college offers, went the junior college route, and, so everything that he's had throughout his career has been earned. He's also somebody who keeps working to make sure that he gets everything he's supposed to get.
With everything that you just said to describe Antonio Pierce, how much do you think that helped him as the interim GM not only hold that spot down, but be successful and get those players to run through walls for him?
Well, I talked to Marvin Lewis about him, and one thing that stood out is that he was a captain on the Super Bowl champion Giants. That's a team that had a Hall of Famer like Michael Strahan. It had a lot of really great talented players. But here's this undrafted guy, who really didn't have a lot of pedigree or a lot of credentials with him, but he was a leader. He was somebody that guys rallied behind. And I asked him, are you surprised that a guy, who doesn't have, he wasn't a top draft pick, he wasn't, a big-time college star or anything, but he was a guy that everybody respected. And he said, pros like pros. So if you're somebody who's dedicated to upholding a standard, if you have a work ethic, if you're in there every day busting your tail, and you're disciplined, you know what you're supposed to do, you make the right reads, you're passionate about what you do, guys respond to that. Guys are drawn to that. And I think that's what Antonio Pierce has sort of carried with himself throughout his career, is that guys are drawn to him. There's a magnetism to somebody who works hard and does, and I think that's what the players responded to. They knew right away that this is somebody they could get behind because he was dedicated and committed, and he's passionate about what he does. So, I mean, if you're in a locker room surrounded by Hall of Famers and you establish yourself as a leader right away, as a player, I don't think it'll be hard to do it as a coach either.
Michael Lee from the Washington Post is our guest here on Raider Nation Radio 920 Unnecessary Roughness. We're talking all things Antonio Pierce. And you talked to a lot of guys while you were putting this piece together, including former NFL wide receiver TJ Houshmandzadeh, who was also on Antonio Pierce's coaching staff there at Long Beach Poly at high school. And he said that leading is leading no matter where, the high school level, the college level, or the NFL. How big of a statement was that from TJ, a guy who obviously did it at a high level as well?
Yeah, I mean, TJ, he knew Antonio, just from crossing paths with him in the NFL, but didn't really get to know him until he worked with him at Long Beach Polytech, which is one of the, most prestigious high school programs in the country, especially in California. They got a long tradition of winning. And so he took over that program, and they worked together. And so he could see that Antonio was somebody who was committed, but also wanted to make sure that his players were dedicated to a standard. And, the story that was, led my story was when TJ shared with me about how, the Long Beach Poly was up 63-9 at halftime of a game. And, you figure 63-9, game's over. You just tell the guys, hey, I'm gonna go with the backups. Don't get hurt in that second half. And Antonio Pierce had the guys running gassers for 20 minutes, just running themselves so they were just exhausted. So exhausted that they didn't even get to the field on time for halftime and got a penalty. But they went on and they won the game 99-9. If you look at it on the surface, you're like, wow, this man's crazy. How you gonna have him run gassers and run sprints? After you're up 63-9. But Antonio was upset with his team because they weren't playing to the standard that he wanted them to play at, and so he didn't want that kind of sloppy play to carry over because they weren't always going to play an inferior opponent. They were always going to have the advantages, so they had to come prepared to play hard at all times, no matter who their opponents, because it wasn't like they were necessarily it wasn't who they were facing. You know, their main opposition was themselves, and that's kind of what he wanted those guys to understand. And TJ, I think he's a guy from Southern California, so he respected Antonio's grind. But I think the main thing is just seeing a guy who looks like Antonio getting this opportunity. I think it means a lot to TJ and a lot of former players because they know where he comes from. Coming from Compton, they know what he's seen throughout his life. And, and the fact that he truly loves the Raiders based on being a fan as a kid, I think it's just a sort of natural thing that he should really get this opportunity because it's not just that he's a fan of the team, but like he really got the job done in his time as a head coach.
Again, Michael Lee from the Washington Post is our guest here on Raider Nation Radio 920, talking all things Antonio Pierce. And, to be thrown into the situation mid-season, not even mid-season. I mean, got through Halloween and November 1st he was named interim, and then to have to go another 9 games and come out with a winning record, 5-4, and had some pretty big wins along that road. And Michael, we know how interims are, man. A lot of times when you're the interim, that's just it. You are only the interim. But this feels like a different situation to me, even from a distance. How does this feel for you when it comes to Antonio Pierce and the job he's done with the Raiders?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when you have a coach fired mid-season, it's usually because the team is, like, really woefully underachieving. Like, everything is just a mess. And so the interim coaches just kind of come in to babysit the rest of the year, just make sure, you don't just totally embarrass yourself as a franchise. But I think in this situation, the Raiders needed something else. They needed a different voice. They needed somebody who could come in and inspire these guys to give their all. They weren't responding to Josh McDaniels, and they were kind of upset probably that the previous interim coach didn't get his shot. So I think that there was some carryover from that, because they didn't get the guy they wanted then, and they just weren't responding to him. So it wasn't like he was given a cleanup duty. He was given an opportunity to be a leader for this group. And I think that's where this is different. Like Steve Wilkes last year was an interim coach, but that team was 1-4 and had no hope. He went 6-6, didn't get the opportunity, but that was because they had already decided when they were 1-4 they were going to go in a different direction. I think with the Raiders, I think they kind of want to see if they could just get something out of this group. And Antonio, they weren't able to make it to the playoffs, but you could see that a foundation was being set, culture was being shifted, and the players just seemed to rally behind him. I think a lot of it had due to the fact that he did play, and he was so different personality-wise from his predecessor.
Again, Michael Lee is our guest here on Raider Nation Radio 920, Necessary Roughness. As you look around the league and you're seeing the Dan Campbells, you're seeing the D'Amico Ryans, you're seeing the Mike Vrabels, the Antonio Pierces, is there kind of a shift in your opinion with the way that coaching is going on, the former players that can really talk to their players and get through to their players and understand what they're going through? Are we going to start seeing a lot more of that than what we've seen in the past?
I think that you as long as you see the success, every league is a copycat league, and I think if you see guys have success, you see guys like you said, D'Amico Ryans coming in his first year and immediately winning the division and taking the team to the playoffs. I think owners are going to say, well, I need to get me one of those guys. The same way you saw Sean McVay do his thing in LA, and everybody said, I need to get me a young offensive guru to be my guy. So I think that now you're seeing that if you could put a former player in that position as head coach, it's worth taking a shot to see what he can give you, and you might wind up, in the playoffs right away. And I think that the more success you see, the more you're going to see copycatting. So there's definitely a possibility, but I think a lot of it's going to depend on what Mark Davis does here, because I think if he gives Antonio Pierce a shot, it sort of validates what they've been doing and what he's been building. I think it sends a message to other owners that, there might be some guys that we've overlooked in the past because we don't necessarily think they come from the traditional route to coaching. But at least in the NFL. But I think if you see more success, you'll see more guys that look like Antonio Pierce.
Right, absolutely. Michael Lee is with us here on Raider Nation Radio 920 Unnecessary Roughness. Just got a couple more questions for you. Marvin Lewis is the guy that you talked to. Antonio Pierce brought him in along with Tom Coughlin, Adam Gase. What did that tell you about Antonio Pierce, that he leans on the ones that he knows that have been there, done that, to get some kind of, evaluate what you're seeing and let me know if, you think that I'm doing this the right way? Yeah,
I also talked to Herman Edwards in the piece, and, he worked with him at Arizona State, and he told me that Antonio's a guy who always has a thirst for knowledge. He's somebody who always sought, other ways, figure out whatever was working. He would go to other colleges and study what they were doing, what systems they were implementing. And so he sort of just has this hunger to kind of, get more, learn more, and figure out more. And he's smart enough to know what he doesn't know. And if he's going to lean on the guys who can do what he can't do. And I think that's what worked with the Raiders. They were a great defensive team, but he also had a great defensive coordinator who knew what he was doing and is very, skilled at what he does. So I think if he has a chance to hire a great staff and get guys who can sort of do some of the things that he's still learning, I think that'll help him become a better coach. But again, it's just all about opportunity. This wasn't one that he expected, especially not his second year in the NFL. But I think that once it came, he didn't look at it and say, I'm not ready. He was just like, well, what can I do to make sure that even in this 9-week, time, that what can I do to learn? So lean on the guys who taught you. And it's like a smart thing to do more than anything. Just lean on the guys who've done it before and who can help you along the way and are willing to help you because they know how much work and how diligent you are to the craft.
So there it is right there. Michael Lee from the Washington Post. Thought that was some really good stuff from him. Again, his piece that he put out, Antonio Pierce won over the Raiders. Is that enough to win the job? And talking to so many different people from Marvin Lewis to TJ Houshmandzadeh and others, right, to be able to write that piece. I thought that was some really good stuff and thought that you would enjoy it, so hopefully you did. Coming up in segment number 3, I got your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. We'll do it next here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about Jase Medical and the Jase case. And I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, right? But we can always talk for a minute about preparing for real life. That's how we get down. So according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of one of the bad seasons over a decade, one of the bad flu seasons over the decade, which is pretty scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than, not having what you need when a significant other, a kid, a parent, whatever the case may be, needs the supplies that they need, and the supply chain issue is keeping them away from these medications that they need. So thankfully, we'll be all right because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, skin infections, respiratory infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us, and it does, right? What do you got to do? Visit jasemedical.com, complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medication will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacist at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use the offer code LOCKEDON. It's all one word to get $20 off your order. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts will close out the week really strong, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with my guy, Raider Al in Georgia. He sent in a text. He said, hey, Q, this is just a thought. What if the Broncos cut Wilson? We should sign him to the vet minimum as a bridge quarterback and still draft one. And all this talk about Jim Harbaugh to the Raiders, how we know he wants to come to us. Personally, I want no parts of that diva of a coach. Don't care about his resume. Give AP the job, period. There's Falcon fans down here in Georgia. Would love to have him. Raider Al in Georgia talking about Russell Wilson and also talking about Antonio Pierce and wants nothing to do with Jim Harbaugh. And look, I'm an Antonio Pierce guy too. I think he's the right guy for the job, but I understand what Jim Harbaugh brings to the table. He has won everywhere he goes, and that's all Raider Nation wants. And so I look at it like you're not going in a bad direction. If you get Antonio Pierce, fantastic. You got an opportunity to really do some good things. I think you have an opportunity to do things the right way as far as like the order of operations. Hire the GM, hire the head coach, right? The coach isn't the one that's demanding all the power. You hire Jim Harbaugh, it's the Jim Harbaugh show. That's really my number one reason for not wanting to go with Jim Harbaugh is I just don't want a guy that have all that power like we saw with Gruden. Again, I know a lot of people don't hear me when I say that. That is my number one reason for not wanting Jim Harbaugh is just the power structure. But I do admit and I do know that he has success wherever he goes. So either way, if that ends up being the two guys that it comes down to and they go with Jim Harbaugh, you're getting a really good coach. There's no doubt about it. I just prefer Antonio Pierce, and that's just my preference for that reason that I mentioned. As far as Russell Wilson goes, you could do that. You could, sign him. And look, the Raiders have to revamp the quarterback room. There's no doubt, right? I think that they need to draft somebody for sure. You're talking about signing Russell Wilson to maybe a 1-2 year deal. The Broncos are going to pay the majority of his contract. you could have Russell Wilson, rookie, and Aiden O'Connell all competing if you want to. I think ultimately you probably end up just with 2 quarterbacks. I think Aiden O'Connell has earned the backup, so I'm just looking. Earned a spot in the room. Let's put it like that. I don't want to just pencil him in as a backup, but I think Aiden O'Connell and other could compete and battle it out. Of course, in training camp they'll have 3 or 4 quarterbacks, but when it's all said and done, I think only 2 are really probably going to make the team. But you never know. They held on to 3 quarterbacks this year, so maybe they do. Maybe they hold on to 3 quarterbacks as well. Maybe it could be Russell Wilson, a rookie quarterback, and Aiden O'Connell. That would be intriguing. I'd be okay with that, but I still want them to trade up and go get whatever quarterback they think could be the guy of the future, because I don't think Aiden O'Connell is that guy, but he's obviously got the opportunity to go out there and prove it. Thanks so much for the text. It's good to hear from you. Up next, got a call from Vader Raider in 303. He's calling to talk about Antonio Pierce, his unconventional style, and talks about the importance of this hire as well. Here he is, Vader Raider in the 303.
Q, Raider Nation, it's your boy Vader Raider. Q, I've been hearing a lot about the Raider way, and I've been hearing about, how AP's approach is unconventional, and the head coaches, there's not a lot of head coaching positions that are available to him. And it got me thinking, this whole thing with Antonio Pierce, it doesn't need to be for everyone, does it? I mean, aren't we all about 30, there's 31 teams in the NFL, and there's us? I mean, that's the way it's always been. It's always been the Raiders against the world. I mean, that's the way it's always been. I mean, it's just how the mentality that our owner, the great Al Davis, instilled in not just his players, but his staff and his coach. Everything from the top of the organization down has always been a fight against everyone. And that's why everybody in the NFL hates us, and that's why we hate them. This whole thing of the conventional idea of coaching and the conventional idea of how to structure your franchise, well, maybe that's for the other 31 teams in the NFL. Maybe that's not for us because, again, it is 31 teams in the National Football League, and then there's the Raiders. And quite frankly, I don't care what anybody else thinks, and hell, isn't that what we all say is we don't care what people think of us. We don't care what people say about the Raiders. We don't care if we're 0-16, 0-17. I mean, we're still gonna, pump our fists and pump our chest at you and still say, hey, we're the Raiders. I mean, it's who we are. This hire, Q, is so important. And I think that's why we all want Antonio Pierce, because he embodies what it means to be a Raiders head coach, and he knows what it means to be a Raider because he is a Raider. So, yeah, Q, I don't really care what these pundits have to say, and I'm so looking forward to the day when he gets hired and Champ is the GM. I get it. We have to do all these hires to make it look nice and clean and make the commitments to the Rooney Rule. But at the end of the day, hopefully there's been there was a closed door meeting that said, hey, we're going to do all this. But at the end of the day, you two are going to be our coach and GM. All right, Q. All right, Raider Nation. I love you. Raider Raider, out.
Thanks so much for the call. I appreciate you. And that's kind of what I was talking about on Thursday's show, man. It's like, I don't think it needs to be for everyone, right? All that matters is whoever the coach is, that they get it right, and he's the right guy for the Raiders, and he helps them win, right? It doesn't matter what style. Dan Campbell wasn't for everybody either, right? Matter of fact, I remember when Dan Campbell was introduced, and I talked about it on Thursday's show, I was like, okay, this guy's putting on a good show for Hard Knocks. This show ought to be fun, whatever. And I didn't think it was going to work. It did. It worked really well, right? I mean, obviously, Dan Campbell's got them cooking with grease, right? They're playing this weekend. Like, that's cool. That's fun. That's exciting. That they're a playoff team, and they weren't a playoff team a year ago. I'm hoping the Raiders have that same trajectory. They missed the playoffs this year, and then next year they are a playoff team. But whatever the case may be, man, they just got to get the right guy for the job. I think it's AP. We'll see what Mark Davis and company thinks, but I'm with you. It doesn't have to be the conventional way. It just has to be the right way, like AP has said, a way they can get it done. Thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. It's good to hear from you as well. Up next, got a text from David in the 209, a pretty lengthy text. He says, good morning, Q and Raider Nation. Just heard Wednesday's episode, and I want to give my opinion on the common downside we hear of bringing in Jim Harbaugh. KD out of NC, and you spoke about a Q. I'm talking about the full control Harbaugh would receive from the team that would overwrite GM and potential executive decisions similar to Gruden and McDaniels. Full control did not work with these two gentlemen, and I understand the concern, but I believe it's different with Harbaugh simply because of history. I'm not sure how much influence others had at Michigan and San Francisco, but if full control means a national championship title at the collegiate level and potentially a Super Bowl at the pro level, why not give it a go? A history like that has just win baby written all over it, and that's part of Raider culture. It's a fair question, just maybe not a fair comparison given the history of the other two coaches. With that said, I love AP and what he's done, so I'd be okay with either coach, but you guys know my vote. Remember, Nation, you don't have to hate on one coach because you like the other. In the end, it might be someone else. It might be someone else's coaching. Love y'all, David from the 209. And yeah, I agree. You don't have to hate on one to like the other. And I think that a lot of people think that that's what you have to do. It's like you got to pick one side or the other. You really don't. You can like multiple, coaches, right? You could say that multiple coaches could do a good job because I do believe there's more than one coach that could do a good job. And you bring up a good point, and that is my concern when it comes to Jim Harbaugh's the whole control thing, only because it hasn't worked out with the Raiders before. And then you look around the league, like Bill Belichick just mutually parted ways after 24 years with the Patriots. Guess what he had? Full control. Pete Carroll out as Seattle Seahawks head coach. Guess what he had? Full control. Right? I mean, you're seeing coaches like that start to be, I don't want to say ran out of town, but they're starting to be, moved on from because the GM, like in Seattle, John Snyder, the GM, wanted to have more control where Pete Carroll had all the control. So I just think that that's not a good recipe for success these days. But you're right? It could work. And like I've mentioned before many times, Jim Harbaugh's resume speaks for itself. So that you cannot deny that. Thanks so much for the text. I do appreciate you. Just got time for a couple more. This call comes from Dave from Shelton, Connecticut. He's calling as a longtime fan of the Silver and Black and lets us know what he really cares about in the next coach. Here he is, Dave from Shelton, Connecticut.
Hugh, this is Dave from Shelton, Connecticut. Bro, love your show. God bless you, man. You're the best. Been a Raider fan since 1976. I don't care who the head coach is, whether he's black, white, I don't care. Spanish, Italian, Greek. I don't care. Just win. I'm tired of losing. AP is the man. He's got to stay and coach his team. Everybody loves him. Everybody respects him. They want to play for him. And that's what we need. And man, I hope he gets it because I'll go nuts if he doesn't. All right, Q. Later, brother. God bless you.
Dave, thanks for the call and compliments on the show. I appreciate it. And that is what it's all about at the end of the day. Just like I wrap up every single show, just win, baby. Just get the right guy in place, right? You're talking about you're tired of losing. You know what I'm tired of? And I mentioned this on my radio show the other day. Obviously, the losing. I'm tired of the Raiders having introductory press conferences, right? I mean, think about it. I've been in Vegas since 2021, and they've already gone through 4 coaches. The math don't math on that. And if they hire another coach, say Jim Harbaugh or other, that'll be 5 coaches since 2021. That's not good. Gruden, Bisaccia, McDaniels, right now Pierce. And they've had multiple introductory press conferences. Like, they're getting too good at having these press conferences. You don't want to be that team that consistently has introductory press conferences, but more times than not, the Raiders are doing that. I want them to get away from that. Look, have one introductory press conference. Make sure it's one of those that everyone wants to be at. And then, man, this guy is so successful, you don't have to worry about an introductory press conference for another 10, 15 years, right? Think about this. The Steelers hired Mike Tomlin 17 years ago. 17. I mean, you go back and look 17 years. Look how many coaches the Raiders have had in the last 17 years. I'm not even going to do the math for you. If you dare look at it, go ahead. It's at least 10 or 11 in that 17-year period, which is way too much, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I can go back and probably name them all, but we have a limited amount of time, and I don't want to waste time on what you already know. Stop with the introductory press conferences. Hire the guy, like you said, hire the right guy, the guy that's going to take this team from where it's at right now, 8-9 team, take them to a 10-win team, 11-win team, and a team that's consistently in the playoffs. That's what I'm looking for. Dave, great call, man. Thanks to hear. It's good to hear from you. I definitely appreciate you. Let's close out with this text from Ridiculous Raider. Yo, Q, Ridiculous Raider here from San Mateo. Love the show. I want AP to have the job. But one thing I'm worried about, and most people forget, is that the defense was totally turned around with AP, but the offense felt stagnant. For the most part, when the running game couldn't dominate clearly, he couldn't motivate everyone to play better, which makes me wonder if more credit should go to him or Patrick Graham. Also hearing Mark Davis will hire a GM of his own and let them pick their head coach. If that's the case, who are the GMs out there that we could target? Thanks again. Love what you do. That's from Ridiculous Raider. And yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And that's why I said a while ago, if you hire Antonio Pierce, what you have to do is you have to put a really good coaching staff around him, or he has to put a really good coaching staff. That's his job. Offense has got to be a lot better. I think the defense is credit to Patrick Graham first and foremost, but I think it's a credit to AP as well. They started playing even at a better level, higher level, once he took over November 1st. They started having a more attention to detail when it came to takeaways and sacks. If you go back and look, in the 9 games he coached, I guarantee there was more takeaways and sacks in those first 9 games than there were, or in those last 9 games, I should say, than there were in the first 8. And obviously there's more games, but you could see they were trending in the right direction. We were starting to see multiple takeaway games as opposed to what we saw. As far as potential GMs, and you're right, talked about that as well, that the Raiders are going to hire their GM first, or most likely that's what it sounds like. They're going to hire their GM first and then go ahead and hire the head coach. And I think that that's good. I think that's the way it should be. It very easily could be Champ Kelly, and he hires AP. It very well could be someone else, and they hire someone. I mean, that could be the direction that they go. But as far as potential candidates out there, I'll go through them real quick. The Raiders requested an interview with Bengals senior personnel executive Trey Brown for their GM job. Obviously, he's regarded as a sharp, diverse, well-rounded candidate. Has been with many Super Bowl teams, or multiple Super Bowl teams, I should say. They also requested an interview with Bills director of player personnel Terrence Gray for the GM job. They're interviewing today Ed Dodds from the Colts, so he's one. They requested permission for 49ers assistant GM Adam Peters for their general manager job. Raiders and Commanders both have interest in Peters. Tom Telesco, from former Chargers GM, he's the guy that the Raiders have reached out to and are going to interview. They already interviewed Kelly Klein Van Callaghan from the Broncos. So there's just a few names right there about potential GMs that the Raiders could be looking at, have looked at, and are probably going to talk to. And they'll probably talk to a few more. I wouldn't doubt that at all. So I guess hopefully that helps answer your question. But, you know, if AP gets hired for the head coaching job, it's because he went into Mark Davis and he rolled out a good plan of what he was going to do to fix the whole team, not just the defensive side of the ball. So thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate it. It's going to do it for today's show. Went a little longer than it was supposed to, but that's how it goes sometimes, especially on Fridays as we close out the week really strong. So until Monday, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family. Monday will be, Martin Luther King Day, but we'll be back here, of course, on the Locked On Raiders podcast because we're here every day, Monday through Friday on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.